So, first, before I get started, I do want to apologize for this video being a little later than I had scheduled, but sometimes God changes our plans, and that's just the best I can explain. So, let's get started. As I tried to determine how I was going to start my series on birds, I admit I struggled. Should I talk about flight, or feathers, or eggs, instinct, migration? These thoughts rode around in my head for several days until I asked myself, what exactly is a bird? It seems the answer to that question depends not only on who you ask, but how you ask that question. What exactly is a bird? Birds are placed into the taxonomic class of aves, which means birds. If you were even half awake in a high school biology class at some time, you were most likely shown a hierarchy of classifications that included domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. This method of classification is based on the work of a creation scientist named Carlos Linnaeus, who was a Christian, by the way. He developed this system of classification in the 1700s based on physical characteristics. According to the book Evolution Exposed Biology, Linnaeus based his work on natural theology. The idea that God had created order in the universe and man could understand that divine order by studying the creation. He wrote in a preface to Systema Naturae, however you say that, the earth's creation is the glory of God, as seen by the works of nature by man alone. Initially, Linnaeus believed in the fixity of species, the idea that organisms do not change over time. That early belief is wrongly used against creation scientists to this very day. Although it is true that Linnaeus originally believed that species do not change, his experiments with plants led him to modify that opinion to understand that variation within species was indeed possible, and was part of God's original plan because God had placed that potential for deviation in the original creation. In other words, Linnaeus looked at the evidence before him and realized that his original thesis was incorrect. God had given his creation the ability for variation, but only within its created kind. The example we are most familiar with is the variation within the dog kind. Whether it is a dachshund or a Great Dane, a wolf or an African wild dog, it is still a dog. Current evolutionary scientists have taken this classification method and shoved their presuppositions regarding evolution into it. These ideas are seen most easily in depictions of trees, putting different kinds of animals and man on the branches of the trees, all supposedly evolving from a single source. It is important to note that there is no direct evidence, no fossil record, no observation that will give any credence to such a model. It is purely derived from human assumptions. There is a field of study among creation scientists called baraminology. It comes from the Hebrew words bara, which means created, and min, which means kind. The best I can understand of this field of study, digging through the scientific terminology, is that baraminology is the study of the created kinds as in there is a dog kind and a cat kind, etc., etc., etc. Generally speaking, but not always, even within variation within a species, animals in the same kind can breed with other animals of the same kind and produce offspring. You may have heard of zebras and horses, I think sometimes they're called zorses, being bred together, as well as tigers and lions. And while I'm certain that size and predatory behavior would be a serious roadblock, I have read that a domestic cat and a lion could technically produce offspring, as well as a dachshund and a wolf. Although kinds have greatly diversified through speciation, cats are still cats, and dogs are still dogs. But what about birds? That is the question that has been plaguing my thoughts for the last several weeks. I could not wrap my head around the goldfinch at my feeder and the ostrich and penguins at the zoo coming from one pair of birds or one bird kind. That made no sense to me at all. In fact, it makes no sense at all to my husband either, who won't believe me when I tell him a penguin is actually a bird. I have come to find that it shouldn't have made any sense for me to believe these diverse birds all came from only one pair of birds brought onto the ark. My study has led me to understand that my previous assumptions of all birds coming from only one bird pair was quite wrong. It seems that from the current 10,000 plus living species of birds, creation scientists have currently identified 196 kinds of birds. They do, however, consider that to be only a rough estimate and feel more study is in order. It seems then that the ark most likely contained approximately 200 different kinds of bird pairs. And since God told Noah in Genesis 7 verse 3 to take the birds of the sky by sevens, male and female, to keep offspring alive on the face of the earth, if you do the math then, there were likely around 2,800 birds on Noah's ark. Good thing that most of them are small. Now, they were not just two as I used to think, but that still does not give us the answer to our question, what exactly is a bird? It seems that the absolute defining point as to what makes a bird starts with feathers. No other animal is known to have feathers. In addition to feathers, birds are vertebrates. They have backbones. They lay hard-shelled eggs, which are not the same as the leathery eggs of reptiles. They are warm-blooded. Also note, this is not the same as reptiles, which are cold-blooded. Birds have wings and are usually, but not always, able to fly. For today's video, let's take a closer look at the most well-known characteristic of birds, feathers. We will look at the flight structure, instinct, and stuff in part 2. In these two characteristics alone, feathers and flight, you will easily witness the genius of God in the creation of birds. God's genius in the creation of birds is amazing beyond our comprehension. Roger Peterson, an American naturalist, ornithologist, and illustrator, wrote, "The feather is a marvel of natural engineering. It is at once extremely light and structurally strong, much more versatile than the stretched skin on which a bat supports itself in flight, or the rigid structure of an aircraft's wings, and far more readily repaired or replaced when damaged. Though nearly weightless, it has strength. The stiff shaft of the quill provides rigidity when support is needed, yet it is supple towards its tip when flexibility is required for split-second aerial maneuvering. When you feel the sleekness of the web, soft yet firm, separate the barbs, zipper them together again by running them through the fingertips as a bird would preen with its bill. The intricacy of the design that allows this can be appreciated by putting the feather under a microscope." I told my husband that I would need to draw a view of a feather as it would appear under an electron microscope. He asked, why? When I told him, he said, well, why don't you just buy the microscope? I told him I would get right on that as soon as I had an extra $100,000 or so in my pocket. With that, he decided my attempt at drawing would be sufficient. So, what is it that we would see if we had a microscope handy? A miracle and the genius of our Creator. That is what we would see. Before getting the microscope of our ink pens out, we will look at the feather as it normally appears to the naked eye. Pictured is a flight feather. We see a quill that has little feather parts on both sides. From sight, we can tell a flight feather and tail feathers from other feathers because the quill, or rachis as labeled in textbooks, is slightly off-center. These feathers are decidedly right or left side feathers. With the naked eye, we can see the feather parts are small and look kind of like stiff fuzzy hairs. These parts are called barbs, or as a whole, barbicels. We also have known from the very first feather we held as a child that if we gently pinch and then slide these barbicels between our fingers, they zip together and the feather looks solid. There may be a few downy barbs at the bottom that do not zip together. With the aid of a simple magnifying glass, we can look at the rachis or quill, and you will notice that on the underside there's a small groove lengthwise down the quill. The top is rounded. The overall shape of the quill on a flight feather is more square than round. Now, that you are aware of its actual shape and your brain is not making assumptions about roundness, the next time you have one of these feathers in your hand, touch the quill and you may be able to notice the indentation in the quill on the bottom. It is believed that the square shape and the groove add strength when the feathers bend in flight. If we add stronger magnification, you begin to see that what looks like fuzz on both sides of each barbicel are actually additional structures crisscrossing in between the barbs. These are called barbules. There are barbules on both sides of each barb. On highest magnification, we can see that there is even more structure to the barbules. The most fascinating and easiest to see are called the distal barbules. They grow upward toward the tip of the feather. Each distal barbule has 4 to 5 hooklets. What is more difficult for me to see, I guess, I haven't found a right photograph of it, is the structure of the proximal barbules. These barbules grow downward toward the bottom of the feather. This barbule has a flange or a ridge along its length designed specifically to be caught by the hooklets. Ornithologists used to describe the ability of the barbules to snap together as Velcro-like, but have since changed their description to zip, as in a zipper, where each pair of zipper parts grabs on the opposite component to complete, whereas Velcro is more squashed together and not as accurate as the description. You can easily Google actual photos taken with an electron microscope of bird feathers under different levels of magnification, and I do encourage you to do that rather than to rely only on my crude drawings. Obviously, I cannot include those photos in this lesson due to respect for the work of others, as well as, frankly, copyright laws. Evolutionists try to tell us that all this complexity of design found in a feather happened through blind chance from a frayed dinosaur scale and millions and billions of years. In addition to the fantastic leap of pure faith it would take to believe a frayed scale could become a complex structure such as a feather, there is no explanation of how broken scales and half-formed feathers over billions of years would have given any animals the structural protection to survive during these changes. There is also not a single piece of evidence that this has happened. None, zip, zilch. I say there is not one chance in a billion that a scale turned into a feather. You have better odds of winning Powerball. In the textbook, Manual of Ornithology, Avian Structure and Function, the evolutionist authors state, quote, "Feathers are a little too perfect. That's the problem. Birds are so thoroughly adapted to the aerial way of life, and their feathers are so exquisitely designed." Pam, notice the word the author uses, designed. They're exquisitely designed for both flight and thermal protection. That feathers no longer bear any of the small but telling flaws that allow evolutionary biologists to see feathers developed from reptilian scales. End quote. A little Pam commentary. You can't see it because it isn't there. Don't worry, our evolutionary college professors do not let a complete lack of any evidence to dissuade them as they continue in that textbook to present several theories as to how it could have happened. None of which have any evidence of actually happening, but it is what our children are taught as fact nonetheless. The Bible, on the other hand, says, God created birds on the 5th day of creation. Then God said, "Let the waters teem with swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth in the open expanse of heaven." Genesis 1:20. At this point, I want to take a slight rabbit trail in our discussion. Could God have made some dinosaurs with feathers? Yes. Yes, he could. We do not know there isn't one or many extinct dinosaurs that had feathers. It is possible. We do not know if dinosaurs were cold-blooded or warm-blooded. We do not know. The fossil records seem to suggest there were cold-blooded like modern-day reptiles, but we do not know that for certain. All we have is a pile of bones to look at. One thing we do know is that modern-day evolutionists are so convinced of the dinosaur to bird theory that they are now placing birds in the same groupings as dinosaurs. Remember that classification chart? It is 100% man-made. You cannot look under each animal or each bone and find a little tag with their classification. Men and women scientists make choices, which, by the way, have changed much over the years. They can't make up their mind. In fact, one of the so-called proof of feathered dinosaurs is Archaeopteryx, an extinct bird who was reclassified as a dinosaur, even though structurally it is without question a bird. One last thing to think about. The paleontologists' presupposition regarding dinosaurs to bird is so strong they continue to find feathered birds, which they are classifying as feathered dinosaurs. Food for thought. They are finding these specimens in the same strata as classical dinosaurs. My question is, if you find them in the same strata, then they were alive at approximately the same time in the same location. How did one evolve into the other? Enough of rabbit trails. Let's get back to the wonder and genius of God. I want to add a little caveat here, though. I can't possibly tell you all there is to know about the marvel of feathers in this little lesson. It would take an entire college course in ornithology to begin to cover all that ornithologists currently understand about bird feathers. Earlier, we talked about the flight feathers. However, I should probably call them by a more proper name description, wing feathers, as I guess that technically all the feathers, which as a whole are very light and very strong, contribute to the bird being able to fly. For wing feathers, the inner wing feathers, called secondary, provide lift to the bird, and the outer wing feathers, the primaries, provide thrust. But that is not the only type of feather found on birds. Let's review the 5 feathers you are most familiar with on birds, and one that unless you pluck a few chickens, you may have never seen. I know I haven't. The contour feather is what you notice first on a stationary bird. These feathers cover the body, streamlining the shape of the bird and contributing to its aerodynamics. The contour feathers covering the body overlap like shingles on a roof. The tips are waterproof. The contour feathers found on the wing are called coverts and help with lift and drag as needed by smoothing over the area where the wing feathers attach to the bone. The tail feathers are similar to the wing feathers. Typically, they are arranged in 6 pairs, with the outer feathers being asymmetrical and the center feathers being symmetrical. They also overlap, with the central feathers being on the top and the rest of the tail being tucked below. The tail feathers act as both rudders and brakes, and for birds such as woodpeckers are stiffened to help the bird remain upright when clinging to the side of a tree. Some birds, like our fancier breeds of domestic chickens, have tail feathers that are more ornamental than useful for flight. Working our way down in the layers of feathers, you will find the semi-plume feathers. These feathers are mostly hidden beneath other feathers. The quill is centered, but the barbs are missing hooks on the barbules to create a fluffy illustration. In some birds, some of the semi-plume feathers are enlarged and used for courtship, such as the long feathers on the back of egrets. Underneath the semi-plume, you will find the down feather. It is similar to the semi-plume, but the quill or rhynchus is small, with the feather lacking barb hooks. It is used to trap air to preserve a body heat, as well as providing an insulation layer. Some birds also have a few powder down feathers. These are specialized feathers similar to the semi-plumes, grown in a few small patches. The barbs grow continuously and the bird never molts these feathers. The tips of the powder down feathers crumble into a powder when the bird bites them, providing a powder that they use in an aid to waterproofing other feathers. The parrot kind and the heron kind are 2 examples of birds with powder down feathers. They are called plumes. I want to stop here for a minute and have a think about this moment. How does the bird know to find the powder down feather? How does he know to bite down on this feather? And even if he bit the powder down feather by accident, how would he know to use the powder as a feather grooming aid? How, by any stretch of the imagination, could that instinct, knowledge, behavior be the result of blind, random, accidental mutations? That entire scenario defies logic. The first of the last 2 types of feathers we want to look at is called a bristle feather. This is the simplest feather, short and stiff with only a few barbs toward the bottom. This feather is found mostly on the head near the eyes and the beak, and may be used to protect the bird's eyes and face, similar to whiskers found in other animals. In insectivorous birds, like flycatchers, it is thought that these bristle feathers may actually help the bird to catch insects during flight. The last feather is called a Phyllo Plume. It is a very short, simple feather with the barbs at the top. It is hidden within the contour feathers and is thought to give the bird feedback on wind, air pressure, and feather movements. I have never seen these feathers, but I read that those that pluck chickens would, as a final step, slightly burn the outer skin to eliminate any of these tiny feathers. Now, birds may seem to be a silly subject to study for a greater understanding of God. But the more I look at birds and the miracle of their existence, the more I am in awe of the genius of our great and mighty Creator. I am reminded when looking in our Bible that, in fact, birds are not the only creatures with feathers and wings. Do a word search on cherubim and seraphim, as well as looking at the living creatures described in Revelation. In addition, although this is an anthropomorphism, God helps us to understand his love and care for us through Psalm 91:4, which tells us that he will cover you with his pinions or feathers, and under his wings you may seek refuge. His faithfulness is a shield and bulwark. The feather is a marvel of engineering. It didn't happen by blind random chance. Let's review what you have learned in this very short lesson regarding feathers. Can you honestly believe that they are the result of an accidental mutations over millions of years from a frayed reptile scale? Or does your logical mind look and see that feathers scream design? As we know, every design had a designer. Bird feathers display highly complex design. Therefore, birds are designed. We know that God, through his glorious Son, Jesus, who the dear Apostle John tells us of in his Gospel, chapter 1, verse 3, that all things came into being through him, Jesus, and apart from him, nothing came into being that has come into being. Jesus designed the birds of the air and those running around the ground and those swimming in the oceans on day 5 for his glory and for our delight. In our next lesson, we will look at the structure of the bird and how it all contributes to the one thing we all wish we could do: fly. If you enjoyed this lesson, please hit that thumbs up button below. It helps YouTube algorithms promote this content. Until next lesson, about 3 weeks we hope, may God be glorified as you look into the sky as well as into your backyard feeders and watch his most wonderful creation, the birds.